of Cracking the Bat, brought to you by the Irish American Baseball Society. The Irish American Baseball Society is a society of Irish people who love baseball and baseball people who love Ireland. And we've been doing these little interviews to kind of, give some of the viewers out there, a little bit of an insight into different facets of the game. And I'm delighted to be joined by actually a member of the Irish American Baseball Society, long-time sports writer. I think a career of over 45. Well, we can't say it because you're still working, so you just, won't say former. But I'm joined by Kiernan. Kevin, good morning, and thank you for speaking to me from across across the state.
Yeah, I'm in beautiful St. Augustine. Beautiful day, of course, and 47 years and counting. Keeps me young, Sean. Much like you. It's why you love the game, and it's been quite a ride, because don't forget, I've covered the NBA, NFL, and baseball forever, and haven't not been in a situation like this since '94 when they screwed Tony Gwynn from getting to hit 400 with the strike. So Here we are today with baseball and the terrible situation it's in.
Well, we're going to cover that in a little bit, but before we do that, I want to go back. I want to have our viewers know a little bit more about about Kevin. So, where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Kennewick, New Jersey, little town. It's a great little town to grow up. Played ball every day. Played right through high school, played through college. So I always thought that I had a little better grasp of the game than most other writers. There were some writers. John Harper was a good player. But just playing the game, Sean, every day. I mean, I'm not kidding, like every day. I mean, 7-8 hours a day. All the things the kids don't do today. So it was a great place to grow up. And then I started working in a little newspaper, Hudson Dispatch. I actually got a job covering the Giants. My first day, I'm one of the few writers you'll ever talk to, Sean, who never covered a prep game. I got hired right away as an assistant sports editor for the Hudson Dispatch, and I went right to covering the New York Giants. And that was a fun assignment, going from college. And it's funny too, Sean, one quick point, how I got into writing. Again, I played college baseball. I was okay. Played right field, first base, mainly a first baseman. But I was friends with all the hockey players. So all the hockey players were great guys. So I started writing a column for my little Ramapo College newspaper called Kernan's Corner. I always say it's the best writing I've ever done. I always joke about that because I was on the inside with these guys. I knew everything. Well, we had an editor of the paper who hated sports. So the next semester, he fired me. And the next semester, I ran for editor with a friend of mine and got the editor, and I fired him. So, so I've had that attitude my whole life. I'm doing it my way. If you don't like it, get rid of me. But it's also been good for me with ball players, because I think they know when they talk to me, I have great relationships still with guys. I mean, I have people texting me all the time. I won't mention names, but off the column I wrote off of Jim Riggleman the other day, I had like 3 major league managers text me about it, because it was sad in a way, but it was great in a way too. Because Jim is going to
Montana.
Yeah, Billings, Montana.
Yeah.
I see you have a friend, which is great.
Yes, this is my co-host. She's the perfect co-host. She doesn't say very much.
It's the perfect co-host.
Yeah,
and,
yeah. So I read that. I mean, but Riggleman's a good dude. I mean, he's kind of, I won't say much maligned, but the problem with Riggleman is that anytime he gets hired as a coach, no manager wants him as a coach, because he thinks, well, he's only been brought in because they're going to fire me, and he's going to be the interim.
Exactly. 16 years in the game, Sean. He knows the game. And he's
listen, I mean, you know what? Anywhere he's brought in, he's good with players. I mean, it's almost like he needs to wear a sign. Listen, I will be your bench coach. I will be the guy who can communicate with the players, and I don't want your job. But
exactly, and that's always his attitude. But it works out that. But the funny thing, Sean, I want to tell you is that he's bringing Mike Toomey, and you probably know Mike, and Dan Radisson. They're all going out there, and some other people too. But I asked Radisson, I said, Dan, why are you doing this? Because he lives in South Florida. He's 71. Jimmy's going to be 70. And Danny said, if Riggs asked me to go to Afghanistan, I go to Afghanistan. So that's that's the brotherhood of coaching and
Yeah.
managing. These guys are gonna be great for young players, and it'll be fun to see how they do.
Yeah, I mean, and as you know, one of the things I should mention is Kevin and I are part of a very unique group called the Winomaniacs. And every November we go and we freeze our asses off with Tracy Ringlesby and his band of merry men. We go to Wyoming, and actually we saw Josh Allen play for 4 years. But so the one thing that if the scenery he's going to have in Billings is going to be,
Oh,
it's an awesome. I mean, it's great to see. It's great to see that he's still in the game. Because sadly, and will cover that in a couple of minutes, is that the game is changing. But now you mentioned something there that I wanted to come back to. I mean, you covered not only I mean, you're known primarily for baseball, but I mean, you've
yes.
covered all the sports. You made I won't say cameo, but you made an appearance in The Last Dance with Michael Jordan, which obviously, because it came out during the pandemic, everybody saw that, and which is pretty cool. So
Let me throw one story in there about that real quick. I got Rodman alone, and that's one of the few. If you look back at The Last Dance, they don't use many interviews from way back when, but they kept my whole interview intact. But here's the difference in how I approach things. 400 writers were waiting for Rodman by the front door. I knew he went out the back door, so by the training room, and that's how I got him. And Rodman and I always had a great relationship, as crazy as it sounds. And the NBA days were good days, hanging out with Bird, Magic, those kind of guys, and of course Michael. So it was great fun. And then I went back to San Diego, and just to complete the story, '88 I went to San Diego, covered the Padres for 10 years. So I've had the ability to cover teams on both coasts, which is kind of important. Small market, big market, Yankees, Mets, Padres on a daily basis. So that's my formative years in sports writing.
now you have written 9 books.
Yeah, something like that. Some were kid books, but they were good books because they really. I did a book on Tim Duncan. Did a book on Roger Clemens. One quick story from the Roger Clemens, because Roger gets crushed all the time now.
Yeah,
But
and I
knew
think
his
wrongly too, by the way.
I agree. I agree with you, and I voted for him, by the way. And this is one story that's going to put your viewers going to give a different view of Roger. I spent time with his sisters, and they're great people. His sisters down in Texas, and I included them in the book because they told me a story about Roger. Roger was like 8 years old. His father had left him when he was very young, and then his mom got remarried, and that poor gentleman died when Roger was like 8. Had a heart attack at the dinner table. They rushed the kids downstairs, right? They rushed the kids downstairs because all the craziness that was going on. And she told me this story. She said Roger stacked up about 10 books just to look out the little small slotted window in the basement to see what was going on. And from that point forward, even though he was younger, he became kind of like the guardian of those sisters, right, moving forward. And she told me early on in his career, when he had some success financially, it was Easter, and he bought each of the girls, I think 3 of them, a different Easter egg with a different colored Easter egg, plastic Easter egg. Inside the Easter egg, Sean, was a car keys, SUV keys, matching the color of the Easter egg. So that's a little insight into Roger that we really don't know.
Oh yeah, I mean, I was lucky enough. We did an event at Foley's when they launched the Zone Baseball.
Oh
And
yeah.
he was brought in, and it was very hush hush. It was last minute. Where basically, I mean, I knew the day before. I couldn't tell anyone, and I didn't. I was a little nervous because I mean, we'd all heard the stories and knew what Roger could be, but my kind of what I was keeping in my back pocket is one of the guys who Roger absolutely worships is Joe Castiglione, and Joe obviously and I are good friends, But he came in and we talked for just he and I, and he'd probably for about 40 minutes, to the
Wow.
point where the guy from the zone said, listen, he said, if you talk to him for any longer, he said, you're going to have to pay him what we have to pay him. He said, because he won't talk to anyone else, only you, and then the wife, Debbie, was there, and she,
Yep.
she actually came back to me. She said, Roger's blown away by Foley's and you. And she's like, can I get your address? And obviously, I got a box of stuff, everything signed by Roger, and so he
Wow.
wrote some very nice things. And then I reached out to the his foundation or his office, and Debbie happened to be there, and she said, Sean, to be honest with you, she said, Roger found the biggest box in the office, put as much stuff into it. He said, if it had been any bigger, she said, you probably would have gotten a Cy Young award. So I was like,
That's
now
great.
Tim Duncan, what was that like? I mean, because he's class act, but he's a very quiet, shy guy.
Very shy guy, and because I covered the NBA in that time, the access was off the charts, Sean. It was like, for example, when the Lakers were playing the Celtics, I stayed in the same hotel as the Celtics in LA, and I hung out at the pool all day with the Celtics. So that's the kind of access I had. So I got to know Duncan through other people. And like you say, he's quiet, but he's very, still work the fact that he was a swimmer.
Hold on one second. Let's close this.
He's safe.
Actually, yes, this is the story I wanted to ask you about, because he only got into basketball because of a hurricane, right?
Yeah, and I forget the details of so long. That's the one thing about my job. I move on to so many different stories that I'm not kidding. It does keep me young because you can only have so much stuff in your head. But the thing I remember was his mom was very important and everything. And I think something happened with the pool or something, the swimming pool. But he was such a great swimmer, and then he took all those swimming attributes and took them. Swimmers are just incredibly dynamic, focused people. And he brought that and intelligence to the basketball court, and he was like all the guys from that generation were phenomenal, and I was very blessed to have that because I also covered the Knicks and Hubie Brown. Hubie was a story in itself. I had Bernard King in his great years, and then the Knicks would play the Celtics. The Celtics would beat the Knicks in the playoffs, and my former paper would let me just stay with the Celtics the rest of the way. So I was like a Celtics beat writer, for lack of a better term. So
Yeah.
the guys like Maxwell and Mckeon, DJ, just Parrish. I mean, it's unbelievable. That was to me. That's when the NBA was in its heyday.
Yeah, the story I heard about Duncan was he was a phenomenal swimmer, and one of those hurricanes came through and wiped out the pool.
Yeah.
And when he went back the next year, they didn't have a pool. So what they did was they had, like, using buoys, whatever, they had marked off a pool in the ocean, and that's where they were going to train. But he said there were sharks in the ocean, so he said that's when
Smart man.
he decided.
Smart man.
Now you also did a book with Girardi, right?
Yeah, Passion and Pinstripes, and there was a lot going on there because Joe, again, he's a little hard to reach sometimes, but once you get to meet with him and talk to him, he had a best friend growing up, and Joe's mom had cancer, so he would spend a lot of time at his friend's house. His friend would spend a lot of time at his house, and the insight I got from that was, again, that's what the one word I want to keep getting back to with a lot of these people is relentlessness. They're relentless to become successful, and that's what Joe became. That's where Joe's work ethic came from. Family ran a restaurant, Sean, so
Yeah.
the work involved in running a restaurant. So so he had all those skills, and his dad did masonry on the side, and so Joe also did those skills. So he was a hardworking. I think that's why he, you look at Joe today, he's still a rock. He's incredibly strong and in shape, and I think that a lot goes back to his childhood. So yeah, it was good to spend some time with Joe and see him from a different perspective. And I'm glad he's in Philly. I'm glad more guys like that are getting some jobs, like Buck, of course, with the Mets. But Joe was he was an interesting character on many levels, and he's very devoted family man, very devoted. He's a religious guy. His wife is very, she's like, he's very devoted to her, and she kind of runs the show, which is kind of funny because she's the manager, but she's the manager.
But you know, in a lot of cases, you know, like with guys in baseball, especially, I would say the same about umpires and to a lesser extent scouts. I mean, the thing is, they don't become successful unless they have that strong woman behind them because they're
Absolutely.
gone for 8 months of the year. You
Absolutely,
know,
and the yeah, that's why they all, and I'm sure you saw the same thing. That they've all joking during the pandemic, like this is going to be different when the games were shut down, like being home all this time, and they've all weathered through it. It seems like so. It's you know, you are devoted to scouts, and I want to thank you for that. What you've done for these guys through the years, because I was talking to Will George yesterday, scout from the Rockies.
just had a
Great.
birthday.
Yeah, exactly. And he said, I told him I had a couple podcasts today and told him I was going to be on your podcast. And he said, make sure to say hi because they all think the world of you. And he went back to the good old days, Sean, and you and I can relate to this when Kevin Brosnahan would come through and you guys would just spend time together. And really, that's, I think, we're both, besides my playing knowledge and the ability to talk to Tony Gwynn about hitting every day for like 10 years. And Tony and I really hit it off. He kind of hooked me up with Barry Bonds, by the way. So, Bonds is hard to get through, but I got through to Bonds in a certain way. I had great discussions about hitting with Bonds, and Bonds and Gwynn are very similar in their approaches. And again, with Barry, through the years, you would have to, being a writer is much like doing the job you had. You got to be a psychologist. You got to figure out how to talk to people. You got to listen. You got to listen.
Right.
I gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. So you listen. So I knew Barry, believe it or not, was in the women's cycling. So I would bring up women's cycling even after his career when I run into him, and he would just go talk forever on that, and I would open other passages. But sometimes with Barry, you had to be tough. You had to say, well, and the hell with you, basically. And I had those days too, and that's when I got one of my best interviews with him for like 40 minutes when he first talked about the earring and why it was his grandfather's earring. And I remember after that interview, I talked to Dusty Baker, and he said to me, Kevin, because he was the manager, he said, I can't believe Barry told you all that stuff. I said, yeah, it wasn't easy. I had to basically confront him first, but he eventually broke down, and that's the job, and I'm sure it's the same job that you deal with.
I mean, the thing about Bonds, is that I always go on what the guys, that were in the locker room with him, and all I've ever heard was he was a phenomenal teammate. He was the guy that when that young kid came up from the minors and didn't have a suit, he was the guy that he went out and he would pay for them. And I mean, I just heard great things. I mean, it's unfortunate, But so listen, we talked a little bit about going back. We have to discuss the elephant in the room, and that is what's going on right now. And I mean, obviously, you've had, the funny thing is, over the years, there were many conversations with writers and broadcasters at Foley's, and about whether it be the article they never got to write, the guy they never got to interview, and countless times I was, they were all, I had several guys say, what, it would be so great if there was somewhere, or if we could write exactly how we feel and not worry about hurting anybody's feelings, not worry about what my editor is going to say. They're not going to butcher it. And, when I read the first thing you did for Ball 9, I was like, this is exactly what it is. Because you know what, you're there's, I mean, obviously there's bosses or someone there, but they give you the freedom to be able to write about whatever you want to write about and how you want to write about it. And that's pretty cool in this day and age.
Yeah, that's very insightful. You nailed it, because once my job was eliminated, and we all got to move on. I didn't cry over it. I had plenty. I think I had 27 years at the Post, so I moved on. Immediately, and about a month or so later, somebody called me, the guy that runs Ball 9, and Chris Vitale, and he's getting into this, and he went to an Angels event where he got to see some of the former players. It was some kind of fundraiser. And he realized that these old players have great stories. So he wanted to hire me. It's a freelance job, I'm doing what I'm doing. But he gave me complete carte blanche to do whatever I want. So I am not afraid to call people out, as you well know. And so I use that. Plus, I am also there's also a network now of baseball people who immediately, I would say right now that more baseball people read my work at ball9.com than at the Post, simply because they pass it around each other. I'm getting texts every day, like I told you earlier, from these guys, and I'm trying to be the voice of the guys who've been somewhat pushed out of the game, and they know what's wrong with the game, and they love the game, and they're not getting the chance because of the nerds. It's that simple. I call it what it is. The nerds have ruined baseball on every level, and I thought it was interesting yesterday with Tony Clark when he talked about, the play, everything's being manipulated, and he's right about that to some extent, because that's how they're paying people now through their numbers. They no longer look at the little things, and they've created this monster of launch angle, power pitching with no command. One quick story: Tom Glavin, first year he was in the league, he lost like 17 games, and he talked to. I asked him about that later on in his career, and he said the first thing he did was talk to all the other hitters, and he realized the hitters told him the hardest pitch was that low outside fastball in the outside corner. So he worked on that whole off season. He immediately, he immediately reversed everything, became a Hall of Famer because he worked on that command. Command is lost. A lot of little things are lost in the game now, and I'm trying to bring the little things back. And I'm not afraid to call guys out. And I'm going to throw one stat at you, because I'm not going to bury you with stats. But last year there were like 57,000 shifts, up from about 5 years ago when there were 17,000. Well, here's the interesting part. I got it written down here: 42,145 strikeouts in MLB, 15,794 walks. So basically, there were 57,000 shifts, 57,000 plate appearances, where absolutely nothing happened. Yeah. There's no excitement to the game anymore. The players that go first or third, the athletic player, the ability to bunt. I got a big kick the other day. UCLA won a game with a walk-off suicide squeeze. I mean, I love to see stuff like that, and fans would love that stuff. Somebody made a good point to me, like the NFL, part of the allure of the NFL is not just the touchdowns, but it's the fact that they have a lot of times they'll have they'll get 3 or 4 or 5, 6 first downs, and they'll build up that excitement. And that's what baseball used to be, with the way the runs would score and things like that. And the defense, who knows, if Ozzie Smith came into the game now, he might not even get a job, because they've turned shortstop into basically a zone defense. And so there's so many things about the game, and I try to bring it forward in all my columns. So ball9.com, and I want to mention another writer we have, Rocco Constantino. Rocco does things that you love, I'm sure, too, because he gets in touch with the former ball players, and he'll do a long, and I mean, I'm writing 2,000 words, so I got plenty of room to write what I want to write. But Rocco will do long interviews, Q&As with these guys, and you get some amazing stories. They may not have been the biggest names in the game, but their stories are pretty amazing. So there's some good things at Ball9, and I'm kind of lucky that it worked out for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's sad to see what's going on. I mean, it's the game has it's changed. I mean, you mentioned our good friend Kevin Brosnan. I mean, I was saying this to somebody recently who was also a Fanica, and he it would be hard to, like him and Red and Jack Lang and those guys, to explain to them what the game is now and how much the game has changed. I mean, it's I mean, like you said, defense. I mean, another good buddy of ours, Mark Gonzalez, sent me a story about the USC baseball coach, Rod. I don't know, I'm going to butcher his last name. It's like Dido or whatever it was. But I mean, he was like, he would, little things like taking infield. Like his team became known for, like, it was almost like the same way that the New Zealand rugby team do the haka, where people would come purposely just to see the USC guys take infield, and like kind of like a badge of honor, but that's all gone. I mean, it's just wild. I mean, I'm looking at like how many coaches these teams have now. I'm like, I was looking, I always said I wanted to be the bullpen catcher because, there's not a whole lot of pressure and there's a good perks. But I mean, what's the game planning coach? I mean, does that mean, game planning, everything's done for you. You show up, the groundskeepers are taking care. You plan, make sure to get on the field. I still want to know what the quality control coach does. I still have not figured that one out, And you mentioned Glavin, but here's the thing. Here's the guy that I don't think gets as much credit as he should get. Was Eddie Perez.
Oh, absolutely.
Those guys, because while listen, don't get me, Glavin, Smoltz, and Maddox were phenomenal pitchers, but you know what? If Eddie Perez wasn't able to get them that little extra on the outside,
he made it an 18-inch plate for them.
Yeah.
So and so you're right, and that's, but again, those are the little things that make the game great, and that's what we love about it. And Riggleman made a great point in the story I wrote this week. I called it Yellowstone baseball because it's out in Montana, and Radisson also joked that his wife signed off on this because she thinks there's a good chance that Kevin Costner from Yellowstone might show up at a game out there. So so there's that aspect of it too. But Riggleman said, even as a coach now, if I got an MLB job as a coach, I would only work for certain guys, Jim Tracy, Bruce Bochy. Because he says what's happening to coaching now is you're not coaching anymore. He says you have to be there at 11 o'clock in the morning staring at a screen just in case the GM showed up, and things like that. And I wrote this. I said this. This is not Jimmy speaking. This is me. The truth is, in case one of the 17 assistant GMs in khakis and polo shirts showed up, because they all come, they all come out of the, and they're all Ivy League. It's almost like an elitism now. There's an elitism in baseball. And not only is the middle class is getting pushed out of baseball. And that's a very important thing. And I mean the middle class player. Yeah. Now, it's not our middle class, but it's a ton of money. But for us, that guy like a Josh Harrison, Sean, the guys that do little things, maybe come to a team and teach a young player how to not be a dope, and things like that. The things they try to do. He was a nice kid. I knew him pretty well. I went to visit him in Atlanta. But Clint Frazier had a little different look at things, and the Yankees tried to help him. It didn't work out. So this next move for him might be best. But those are the little things in the clubhouse that happen. Yeah. Carlos Beltran, I'm sure with Carlos. Carlos, despite all the cheating stuff, Carlos was an incredible teammate and would help those young players. And a very smart baseball player. But it's always been, people want to talk. Let's talk about the Yankee Dynasty. And that if you want to go in that phase from 96 to 2000, 2001 back, and you see that, while it was great, yes, it was great to have the Jeters and the Posadas and Bernie Williams and Paul O'Neill and all the rest of it. But, think back, guys who played a pivotal role in those games, are guys like Luis Sojo, yes. Or I'm trying to think. Scott Brocious. Scott Brocious was that type of player.
He was the MVP. You had Shane Spencer, you had, Ricky Leday, there was, it's, you need to have Indians. It can't just be Chiefs, and you can have an all-star at every position, But, so a couple of questions I want to ask you. Is there a person that you, or how would I put this best? Who's the person you never got to interview that you would love to have been able to sit down and interview?
Well, I think I checked off all the boxes, including Muhammad Ali. I had lunch with Muhammad Ali one day up in his with some other writers, but I sat right next to him, and I remember it was the only time, Sean, I was ever intimidated as a writer. It was at his training camp before some fight. I started in '77. Don't forget. So I go way back. That's a lot of decades ago. And I remember having soup, and I remember I was so nervous, my soup spoon was a little going crazy. So yeah, that's a great question. Mickey Mantle, I would have loved to have real good conversations with Mickey, and another guy too. And these were the guys that I grew up watching as baseball players. But even in their later lives, a guy like Roger Maris, what he went through. I love talking to a guy like Bobby Richardson. I spoke to Bobby recently, and he tells me stories that were unbelievable about his how with Mickey finally, Mickey basically turned at the end. He was a very religious guy, and Bobby was there for those last moments and everything. So getting those type of stories from all those guys would have been great. But you know, uh, the NBA, I had those guys. The NFL, I had those. I would have liked to have done, and these guys before my time. But Brady, I spent time with Brady. He was great. And I actually think I want to point this out. I'm glad you brought this up. I think Jeter's stepping away is a little bit Brady related. I think he's seeing, Brady and him are very similar. And once they kind of changed the game on him, where he wasn't going to have the money he thought he was going to have, it's like enough. So again, I've been so lucky with interviewing all these guys, hanging out with them, and also criticizing them. It's that's not easy either. But that's the beauty of being a real reporter. You go into the clubhouse the next day and you take your shot. I remember.
Yeah, well, that's to be honest with you, that's the key of a true reporter is, because people, like, one of the problems I started to run into towards the end of Foley's was, people come in and say, well, how come you don't have bloggers on, in your writers section? And I said, no. I said, the reason why I said, I don't have bloggers because, you know what? I said, bloggers can write what they want. I said, they don't have to walk through those doors the next day and look at the guy that they criticized the night before. I said, and that's the difference. So I said, when they can do that, and when they do that, then
Great
we
answer.
will find a space for them.
Great answer. Yeah,
But the funny thing, when you're talking, when you talk about quotes and stuff like that, when you mention about like that you go to the GM meetings or the owners meetings now, and it looks like you've got an alumni event for some Ivy League college, and a former colleague of yours had to me, and I will continue to use it, one of the greatest lines, Tom Keegan, and he said, Sean, he said, listen, he said, it's like this. He said, teams don't win unless the guys making the baseball decisions used to chew tobacco. And I mean, it's true when you think about it and you go back and you see, like when you had, let's go back to the Yankees because it's close by, but you look at the guys who were making the decisions. Showalter, minor leaguer, Stick,
yep.
Bob Watson, and they're the guys. I mean, and in fairness to Cashman, at least he does give credit to, he's willing to give credit that, he was very lucky that that basis was there. And he
Bill
was able
Lindsay,
to build
Bill
on
Lindsay
it.
was another one. The scout, Bill Lindsay, those type of guys. They built it. And the stat I use now, Sean, and again, I want to make this clear too. I'm not saying there can't be any new things in the game. A lot of the new things.
Oh, there's a place for analytics, without a doubt.
And a lot of the new things aren't new. They were just called something different 25 years ago. And even Riggleman, again, just the other day, because I spoke to him, he pointed that out. But the problem is when they don't listen to the voices in the room, and that's what happened. Billy Beane, you can say, oh, you want about Moneyball and things like that. And I know Billy well. Billy listened to other people. He never got to the arrogant stage. We are in the arrogant stage of baseball, and we see it every day. And that's why I've been so hard on Manfred, because the arrogance is off the charts. And but I see it every day in the clubhouse, in the locker room. The Yankees, one point, and Cashman always gets mad when I say this stat, but it's a stat that's true because everybody talks about the Yankees' 27 championships. Since 2003, Sean, the Yankees have won as many World Championships as the Marlins won. Mm-hmm. So that, I don't care what you say, something's changed there with the Yankees in their evaluation with scouts, how they do things, how they've gone, totally into the numbers, and you don't get the little things that make a difference in a winning rally. Yeah, what usually happens, Sean, every year, the team that wins the World Series, usually a team that goes back to some extent, goes back to playing the game the way it should be playing. The Braves were a perfect example of that. The Braves had the injuries that knocked out, and some other good things going on with Acuna, and they rebuilt on the run. They rebuilt their outfit.
And don't forget and Soroka. I mean, he was pretty much
Soroka, another one. The things that they did, but they they improved from last year to the next year. And we all know about Ron Washington. Obviously, their infield defense, but they also improved their base running.
Yeah.
The loss of base running, I can't believe how it is. I remember a couple of years ago, I killed Brody Van Wagenen in a column when they were really struggling, the Mets. And the next day he came up to me in the press box and he said, "Kevin, why did I got to ask you?" And I knew something was up because he came up to the press box. You know, he came to my territory. And I said, he goes, "Kevin, why did you write that column you wrote?" And I said, "Brody, I didn't write that column. You wrote that column. I asked you if this was on you, the Mets struggles. And you said, no, it was a team thing. It was this and that. So that was your answer. And that was the whole key of the column." And then I proceeded. This is the point of the story. We had a great conversation after that, 40 minutes. But I had to show him on my phone the inability of most Mets, because I had some video there, of most Mets to take a secondary lead. They were terrible with secondary leads. And those are the little things that all those baseball guys you just mentioned would teach. The Butterfields of the world, Ron Washington, what he did every morning. If you go to when I used to go to Disney at 7 a.m. to talk to Chipper Jones or those guys over at the Braves, I could guarantee that before I went in the clubhouse, Ron Washington was in front of the dugout working with some young player one-on-one on hard scoops. So all that. These coaches are not allowed to coach anymore. They know they're not allowed to coach, and that's why they are so frustrated.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it in in the last couple of years. I mean, the Dodgers lost the World Series because, that basically the analytics took over. I mean, I had somebody with the Dodgers tell me that, that basically the day before the game, they gave Dave Roberts who was going to pitch and when they were going to pitch. I mean, but as you said, it's the ability to manage, the ability to lead. When the Nationals won their World Series, when they qualified, I believe, for the CS, when they won the DS, there were a couple when they made the World Series, there were a handful of guys who happened to be in New York. And they watched the game of Foley's, and I mean their bullpen was dreadful, terrible. And one of the guys who's very high up in the organization, he said to me, he said, "Sean," he says, "I'm going to tell you right now," he said, "the World Series starts on Tuesday." He said, "We have," we have 12 pitchers that were taken to the World Series. He said 7 of them needn't bother bringing their cleats. He said they're never going to get used.
Exactly, Sean. And to back up that story, that's a great story. But I talked to Jack Mckeon, and he became a senior advisor for that team, don't forget.
And his son.
And his son is working still there. Casey's working there. But Jack was mainly brought on to try to talk to Davey Martinez, talk some sense into him as a young manager. And I believe, just to back up exactly what you said, Jack was the one that said, you got to bring in some of your starters to close up some of these games and do some things. And that's exactly what they did. They went old school. They won the World Series, much like Jack did in 2003 when he didn't wait to the 7th game. He used his ace in the 6th game, and he didn't care. But those managers, I very similar to what you say. I always say now that the decisions are made at 5 o'clock for the 9:30 decision. But evidently, from what you just said, sometimes they're made at 5 o'clock the previous day. You could tell that with Dave Roberts, because it would always roll off his back pretty easy when he would make a pitching mistake, and he would just say, that's what we decided to do. So he was almost in code telling you, hey, not my decision.
But when they won, you could tell basically he took that book and tossed it in the garbage. So now you mentioned one of my favorite people in all of baseball, Jack Mckeon. I mean, it's not, if you write, books have been written on Jack, including one that you wrote with him. But I mean, if you write his life story, I mean, we're talking about War and Peace here. I mean, the guy, he has, I'm hoping at some point that we're going to be able to get, I'm waiting for Casey to be in the same place as Jack, because I'm not quite sure how Jack and Zoom work. But we are hoping to
be able to figure it out, because the thing about Jack is he's a big stock market guy, so he knows how to do all those little stock market gadgets on his phone.
Yeah.
So
plus but the thing is, you got to get him off his mower. I mean, he's got I think 4 lawnmowers, and every time I call him, the wife will say, "Oh, he's on the mower." I'm like, Jesus. I'm like, he spends more time on one of those mowers. So, Kevin, we're going to have to wrap it up here. Before we wrap it up, um, as I said, you have, I won't say been critical, but you've spoke your mind on how you feel about, the state of baseball and stuff like that. Um, what, if I make Kevin Kernan commissioner, um, how do you think you can change the game, or what would be the first three things you would do to change the game?
Well, obviously, the first thing we get the players back. Have a meaningful conversation, get it done. So there's future. The second thing I would do is I would start under. I would talk to all the GMs and the people in charge of teams and try to get back to the roots of baseball. And I would even show them videos. I watched the '52 World Series Game 7, I believe it was, recently on YouTube, and both Jackie Robinson and Roy Campanella bunted for hits. So I would have to impress upon these nerds. There's other ways to score besides the home run. The whole 3 outcome thing. I would get rid of that. I would not change. Here's one thing I would not do. I would not ban shifts. I think that would be terrible. I think the hitters need to take care of shifts by just going the other way, and I would influence them that. And I would drop the prices, and I know that's crazy, but I would, because we're at a very dangerous time with baseball now. The world is on fire, and baseball is playing these games to fight. And I hate to use the analogy, but it really is millionaires versus billionaires. And they don't understand how the fan feels. And Sean, this is very important. Much different than '94, because I was here for '94 with the strike. These fans have been angry for a long time now. And what's the big difference? We have social media. So the social media, and there's nothing social about social media, by the way, but social media is a big change. So I would bring the game. In some ways, I would bring the game back to its roots. I would make the game more athletic. I would focus on the game and not anything else, and creating new rules and things like that. And I would also, that's why I think a lot is riding with Buck Showalter. He's a direct line to the owners. And I would get all the owners in there and say, listen, I know you guys are all numbers guys, but you need to get back to the what makes this game exciting. If you don't, then the game will continue to go down the path where nobody watches it. And who can sit through a 4-hour game? You got to shorten the games too. So probably the first rule I would institute would be that the hitter could not step out of the box, in between pitches, because that's become, because of all like you mentioned earlier, the mental skills coach now and this guy and that. What does every hitter do? They play with their gloves. They're focusing. They're doing their little thing every pitch, and it's great for them, but it takes out 30 seconds of the game. Tony Gwynn told me a very interesting thing when we talked hitting one day. He says, Kevin, all I do is look at the label of the decal, whatever, the LA Dodger logo. I look at the pitcher's hat, and then I slide over and put a make-believe picture frame where that ball's going to come out of. That's all you need to do to keep the game moving. So I keep the game moving. I get defense back in the game, and I would make the game fun. It's really simple. I get rid of I would get more. The other thing I would do, because a pitcher told me this, a guy we both know, and I don't want to mention his name, but he's a longtime pitcher coach. He says, what the hell with Manfred? Every one of his advisors is a hitter. If you think back to the guys he has, and they're good guys, Raul Banez, some other people, he never has pitchers advising him. I would get a pitcher in Manfred's inner circle to try to fix this game a little bit. So those are just some of the things I would do. And I would bring back games where you could bring your family in the middle of the week where you're not selling tickets anyway and get your family in cheap.
Yeah. I mean, people have asked me about, do we play too many games? And, I mean, the one thing that, that I know it was just for the pandemic, but I became a huge fan of that 7-inning doubleheader.
Because the game moved, and it forced them to shorten. Obviously, the game was shortened, so decisions were made quicker. There was no just sitting back. Yeah. I agree on that extent, but I think all the games used to be like that when there were 9 innings. But with the way they've changed the game, and let's face it, all the relievers now. But if you don't get the hitters, and this is a scary thing too, Sean. I have a lot of friends who coach amateur, and they're saying these kids are coming in now. And I go to college games when I have my time off now here, and I'm watching nothing but launch angle and strikeouts in other sports too, in other levels of the sport. So it's really sad if you don't get back to contact. Here's what I would do too, and this keeps it simple, but I think that's a great question to have. You know what I would bring back? I would bring back pepper.
Yeah.
I would have players play pepper. It was funny. I'll leave you with this. Dustin Pedroia. I'm with him one day, hanging out with him in front of the Red Sox dugout up in Fenway, and there were two young infielders coming up, two Latino kids. He brought them out, and he taught them how to play pepper. And he said to me, Kevin, do you believe it? These kids don't know how to play pepper. And that's the fault on baseball because they don't teach it anymore. It's all about back control and little things like that pepper teaches you. So there's a lot of good things. And the other thing I would do, Sean, this sounds crazy too, but you really got me thinking. One of my great thrills as a young man, and probably got me involved in this business, was when I went to a Yankee game with my dad, who was a cop and would get nice seats for Tiger games because he was a Tiger fan. When we left Yankee Stadium, we would walk off through the stadium, through the center field exits. Just stepping on that field made me a fan of baseball for life. So I would do little things like that for the fans to get them back in the game.
Yeah, and the groundskeepers may not like you, but I mean, I've always said that. I said it to somebody. It was an executive at a team, and I was talking about. I said, if I said even for Father's Day, I said, well, you know what, all these teams have the kids get to run the bases. I'm like, for Father's Day, what would be kind of cool would be, how about you let the fathers just walk, like even out of the warning track, but walk in the outfield. I mean, you're not going to damage.
Yeah, walk along the track.
Well, Kevin, listen.
I got lost there.